Now, over 1 million people have signed a petition calling for former Post Office CEO Paula Vennells to resign. And I'm about to introduce you to a man who disagrees with all of them. It is the one and only author and columnist for the Mail on Sunday, of course, Mr. Peter Hitchens. Delighted to welcome you back, Peter. And I actually quite approve of your view on this, interestingly enough. So I can't really argue with it. But tell us why you don't think that the stripping of this CBE is of any point.
Well, there are two reasons. First, to do with the people who gave it to her, that they should never be allowed to forget that they did this. And the second, in her case, that she should not be allowed to forget that she accepted it, and it should act constantly for the rest of her life as a spur and a memory to the fact that she needs now to do something very serious to deserve it. And I think that this it's so easy, isn't it, to say, let's take it away. And then if it's taken away, then it's over. And everybody's satisfied and the job is done. I will never be satisfied because, having watched the tremendous drama last week, which told me far more than I ever knew about the matter until then, I don't think that the Post Office or anybody else who was involved in this will ever be able to give proper restitution for the damage they did to those lives. The people who took their own lives, the people whose marriages were torn to pieces, the people who were treated as pariahs by people who previously respected them, the people who went bankrupt and lived for years, which should have been happy and prosperous, as miserable and pinched. None of that can ever be brought back. And the people who were sent to prison, being sent to prison for something you have not done is just so unbelievably terrible that, again, there is no restitution, no compensation, no suffering on anybody else's part, which will bring back what's been taken away. So I don't think that campaigning is for someone to have a bauble which they've been given and taken away from them is actually anything remotely to do with what we need to do to approach this. The moves which are beginning to take place to actually end this interminable process of getting people's convictions quashed and getting them compensation to allow them to lead something like normal lives, that is now being speeded up. That's the real thing. In the case of Paula Vennells, this is a person who has stood up as a person of conscience, who's been a minister of the Church of England, who's preached the gospel of Christ to people in a church. She has an enormous task ahead of her for the rest of her life. And if she's still got that CBE, I think it will act as a spur on her to put right as much as she possibly can of the wrong that she's done. And I think that would be far, far better. These symbolic gesture headline things don't work. And I was always reminded when these things come up of Robert Mugabe, the Zimbabwean tyrant, who had been given, I think, a knighthood by the British Foreign Office. And everybody said, oh, let's take it away. And I said again, no, don't take it away. Remember, we actually gave this man a knighthood. Don't forget that we made this mistake. Half the thing that we need to take away from this post office scandal is to understand that many of us were complicit by inaction in allowing a terrible thing to happen, in not seeing it when it first emerged, in not doing enough to put it right. And we should be much more vigilant. We should change our society. This actually particularly applies to us in the media. We are far too inclined, when people are accused of crimes in this country, to presume their guilt. Not formally by announcing that they're guilty, but by treating an accused person as if he or she is guilty, demanding they be suspended from their job and all the rest of it. When we have no idea whether they're guilty or not, the presumption of innocence really does need a shot in the arm in this country. And that starts with people saying, well, hang on a minute. Here is this person, here is Jane here, who's for many years been an honest person who's been trusted. Pensioners have trusted her in one case with their credit cards, with their debit cards. She's always been honest, and now suddenly here she is up in front of the court, being accused of the most terrible wickedness and fraud and theft. Shouldn't we just pause for a moment and wonder whether these charges are justified? There wasn't anything like enough of that.
No,
and there should be a lot more of it.
There wasn't,
so
but there were.
Instead of going on about Paula Vennells' CBE, let's look at ourselves as
yes.
Say,
but there were, Peter, thousands of articles written about it. You know, people say, well, you know, the media didn't really get the whole grip of this story. They didn't really write much about it. You know, I've actually got a list here from Harry Cole from The Sun, The Times, 383 articles, The Telegraph, 234 articles, The Mail, hundreds more, The Mirror, 83. You know, there's been hundreds and hundreds of articles written. But let me ask you this, though. I mean, I take your point about the Vennells CBE, but what about all the other sort of senior politicians, ministers, and other executives of the company who willfully did not look to see whether they were wrong, should they also escape any kind of sanction?
The public can punish politicians at the polls, and it can do that, especially in a general election year, if it believes that any of these people who are still in positions of office, elected office, if it believes that any of those people have failed, both to do what was right and to provide restitution for the wrong they did, they can punish them. By the simple means of refusing to vote for them anymore. And that's the course I recommend if you feel that someone is in that position. So no, but with the particular case of Paula Vennells and her CBE is different, and I think that it is just too easy. And I think that if any of us had done a thing like this, the best thing we could do would be to spend the rest of our lives putting it right. And I don't think taking away her little medal will actually make that more likely.
Yes. Let's just finish up, Peter, because I know you wrote about it this weekend, the film about Nicholas Winton's life. A remarkable man, a remarkable story. But you were interested in some of the things that have been said around what he did.
It's a tremendous story, and I think it's one of the most moving things that anyone's ever seen when he was in the studio on Esther Ranson's program and suddenly found that everybody in the room with him owed their lives to what he'd done. It's a wonderful thing to have done and a tremendous story, but the film has elements in it, as some people nowadays do when they look back on this era, suggesting that the asylum seekers of today are the same problem as the Jews who were being persecuted in Germany in the late 1930s. By the time Nicholas Winton did what he did in Prague, it was known that the German regime was actually homicidally attacking the Jewish population of that country, and it desired to kill them because they were Jews. And this, of course, is a problem which does not go away. It lies behind what Hamas did on October the 7th at Gaza, and it lies behind the creation of the whole state of Israel. It's a very large, complicated, and painful subject. It shouldn't be, in my view, separated. It should, in my view, it should be separated from other instances of people seeking refuge, unless they are exact parallels. I have yet to see one. There were little bits in the film which suggested the makers wanted to suggest it was the same thing. It was not. It was a unique occasion. And another thing we need to remember here is that we didn't fight the Second World War to save the Jews of Europe. On the contrary, as soon as the war actually got underway properly, all efforts to save Jewish children in Germany and Czechoslovakia were at an end. That finished, and almost all pleas to do anything about the problem for the rest of the period of the war were ignored, even though by about 1942 or 3, I seem to recall, the Foreign Office in London and their equivalents in Washington, D.C. were very well aware of the mass murder which was going on. Very little was done. We shouldn't congratulate ourselves over much. We should certainly honour Nicholas Winton and all those people who did personally tremendous things to save Jews. We shouldn't congratulate the rest of ourselves all that much about it, though, because it wasn't a particularly shining episode in the history of this country or many others.
I think so. Peter, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens there from the Mail on Sunday with his view. Very much different from most people's, that the CBE should not be handed back